What if the apocalyptic prophecies written, 2,000 years ago in the book of Revelation are being used today, not as a sacred religious text, but as a literal step-by-step project management timeline by the world's most powerful people?
I mean, it sounds like the plot of a dystopian thriller.
Right. Completely wild. But what if the end of the world isn't a divine inevitability, but a highly orchestrated corporate rollout? Today, we are opening a stack of documents that connects a 1992 intelligence warning, the sudden, really aggressive push for a global digital ID, and the exact granular military blueprints for collapsing the Middle East.
Yeah, and when you look at the raw data, the historical shifts, and the technological infrastructure being built right now under our noses, the architecture of this theory is just staggering.
It really is.
It forces you to look at the daily news not as random, chaotic events, but as sequential steps in a very deliberate operation.
And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dives. You, listening right now, are about to hear a synthesis of materials that are, frankly, mind-bending.
Very much so.
We're looking at a wildly eclectic mix here. On one hand, we have startling, modern geopolitical analyses, really granular, up-to-the-minute data on global choke points, supply chain vulnerabilities, military logistics.
The hard data.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, we have contemporary prophecy commentaries from ministries, looking at current events through the lens of ancient biblical texts. And tying it all together is this completely fascinating, almost eerie archival interview from 1992 featuring a man named Bill Cooper.
It's a heavy stack of material for sure. At first glance, you might legitimately wonder how a grainy audio cassette interview from over 30 years ago, modern naval military logistics in the Red Sea, and theological debates about the Book of Revelation even belong on the same table.
Right, it sounds like a mismatch.
It does, but as you dig into these sources, a very distinct, very intentional pattern begins to emerge.
Exactly. And the central theme, binding all these disparate sources together, is a highly controversial, incredibly complex theory. The theory proposes that global elites, this deeply entrenched, invisible power structure operating above national governments, are intentionally engineering global chaos.
And not just for fun.
No, they aren't doing it just for the sake of watching the world burn. According to the materials we're analyzing today, this chaos is merely a tool. It is a calculated, necessary runway to implement a comprehensive digital ID system.
Which these sources argue serves as the ultimate, inescapable endgame mechanism for total human control.
But wait, before we go any further into the mechanics of how this supposedly works,
Huh.
we need to pause and establish some really important ground rules for this deep dive.
Definitely.
Because the materials we're synthesizing today contain intense, highly charged viewpoints.
We are dealing with allegations of global elite cabals. We are examining incredibly sensitive Middle Eastern conflicts. And, we are unpacking literal biblical prophecies and highly specific interpretations of end times theology.
Right. So, to you listening, we need to be crystal clear. We are absolutely not taking sides today.
No.
We are entirely impartial guides here. We are not endorsing any political faction, left or right. We are not advocating for any specific religious viewpoint, and we are not validating any particular worldview, geopolitical agenda, or ethical framework found in these documents.
Our job, our only job, is to impartially report the contents of these sources so that you can understand the anatomy of this theory.
Yeah. We want to show you how these ideas are constructed, the underlying logic they use, and how they connect historically and technologically. We leave it entirely up to you to draw your own conclusions.
Precisely. We are mapping the territory, not telling you where to build your house.
I love that.
We are looking at the how and the why of this theoretical framework, treating it as a complex mechanism that we are reverse engineering for the listener.
Beautifully said. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the absolute foundation of this theory, which relies on a very old, very effective psychological and political mechanism.
The idea that you must first create a massive, terrifying problem before you can possibly sell a population on your ultimate solution.
Yes. What the sources are describing here is the Hegelian dialectic in its purest, most weaponized form.
Right. And for those who might not be familiar with the philosophy, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was an 18th century German philosopher. He posited that human history and thought progress through a specific triad thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
But when applied to modern political manipulation, it's simplified, right?
Very simplified. It becomes problem, reaction, solution.
Wait, break that down mechanically. How does that actually play out in real time with a population?
Sure. Let's say you are an incredibly powerful entity, and your goal is to implement a deeply unpopular policy, say, the complete eradication of financial privacy and the implementation of a biometric tracking system.
Nobody wants that.
Exactly. If you just announce that on a Tuesday, the public will riot. The human desire for autonomy is just too strong, so you don't propose the solution. Instead, you fund or engineer a massive crisis, the problem.
An engineered problem.
This crisis must be so severe, so existential, that it shatters the public's sense of safety.
Which leads to the reaction.
Exactly. The public reacts with absolute terror. They demand that someone, anyone, do something to restore order. They say, please make us safe. We don't care what it takes.
Wow.
And right at that moment of peak vulnerability, you step out from the shadows and offer the solution, the exact biometric tracking system you wanted to implement from the very beginning.
But now you aren't a tyrant imposing your will.
No, you are a savior answering the pleas of the desperate. People don't surrender their sovereignty when things are going well. They do it when they are terrified.
And this brings us right to that 1992 interview with Bill Cooper. I mean, listening to this tape is surreal.
It really is.
He's speaking decades ago, long before smartphones, long before the modern internet. But the geopolitical chessboard he describes looks exactly like the push notifications we are getting on our phones right now.
Cooper made some incredibly bold, sweeping claims in that interview. He alleged that a secretive, multi-generational group, which he referred to as the ancient mystery schools, essentially orchestrated the modern geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
He goes so far as to claim they manipulated global powers to ensure the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 for a very specific, chilling purpose.
Yeah, according to Cooper, it wasn't about a religious homeland or post-war reparation. It was designed as a geopolitical instrument to inevitably, predictably bring about the Battle of Armageddon.
Which, on its face, sounds completely wild until you hear his reasoning.
Right.
He argued that the ultimate goal of these hidden power structures was to deliberately provoke a nuclear war, or at least a conventional conflict, so terrible, so globally devastating, that citizens of every nation would literally fall to their knees.
The psychological trauma of watching cities burn or economies instantly evaporate would be so profound that people would beg for the destruction of their own national sovereignty.
They would willingly hand over the keys to a unified global government, as long as that centralized government could guarantee that a war like that would never happen again.
Right. The underlying logic is brutal but historically sound. A global government cannot be imposed by military force without sparking endless, decentralized guerrilla rebellions across the globe.
You can't occupy the whole world.
You really can't. The subjugation has to be demanded by the people themselves, and people will only demand their own subjugation if the alternative is complete annihilation.
But for a population to willingly hand over their autonomy to a digital grid, a localized panic isn't enough. You need a shock to the global circulatory system.
A massive shock.
And when you look at the modern intelligence reports in our stack, that shock is mathematically mapped out in the Middle East right now. The sources detail a catastrophic scenario centered entirely on the potential for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz.
And we really need to explain the mechanics of the Strait of Hormuz, because for most people, it's just a geographic name on a map.
Right, like where even is it?
Yep. Geographically, it's a narrow stretch of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. But if you track global shipping logistics, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a waterway, it is the jugular vein of the global economy.
How narrow we're talking?
At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide. But the actual shipping lanes, the deep water channels where massive supertankers can safely pass, are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 Niles, that's nothing. That's the distance of a quick jog.
Exactly. And through that incredibly narrow 2-mile-wide channel, roughly 20 million barrels of oil flow every single day.
That's, wait, 20 million.
Yeah, 20 million. That is nearly 20% of the entire planet's global liquid petroleum consumption.
20%. And the sources map out exactly how that gets shut down. It's not like you need a massive, sophisticated navy to close a 2-mile lane.
You don't. That's the terrifying part of asymmetrical warfare. Iran doesn't need aircraft carriers. They have thousands of cheap, mobile, anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in the mountainous terrain along their coastline. They have fleets of fast-attack speedboats armed with torpedoes, and they have naval mines. If they sink just 2 or 3 massive supertankers in that deep water channel, the strait is physically blocked.
Just 2 or 3 ships.
That's it. Insurance companies immediately pull all maritime coverage for the region, and the flow of 20 million barrels of oil literally stops overnight.
And the sources walk us through the economic cascade of that event. We're not talking about a slow, gradual decline where we transition to green energy. We're talking about an instantaneous, devastating shock.
Mathematical devastation.
The economic collapse outlined here is terrifying. The forecasts point to oil skyrocketing to $120, even $150 or more a barrel immediately. But let's look at the how of that. What does $150 oil actually do to the world?
It fractures the supply chain at the cellular level. Modern civilization is essentially an engine that runs on diesel. When oil hits $150 a barrel, it's not just that it costs you $100 to fill up your sedan.
Right.
The cost of diesel fuels the entire agricultural sector. Tractors, combines, transportation trucks, they all become economically unviable to operate. Furthermore, natural gas and petroleum byproducts are the foundational ingredients for modern synthetic fertilizers.
Right, the Haber-Bosch process. Use natural gas to synthesize ammonia, and ammonia makes the fertilizer that keeps half the global population from starving.
Precisely. So when energy costs quadruple overnight, fertilizer production halts. Without fertilizer, crop yields plummet.
So you don't just get expensive groceries.
No, you get systemic famine. The cost to move a shipping container across the ocean quintuples. Basic goods disappear from shelves. It triggers a devastating wave of global hyperinflation that strategic petroleum reserves simply cannot fix.
Because even if we release from the reserves,
If the U.S. releases 1 million barrels a day from the strategic reserve, it's a drop in the bucket compared to a 20 million barrel daily deficit. It is a Band-Aid on a decapitation.
and it's not just theoretical wargaming. Look at the specific alarming headlines cited in our sources. They are painting a picture of a region actively, deliberately spiraling into this exact engineered chaos right now.
Yeah, the headlines are wild.
We have reports in the stack of a massive 5,000-kilometer ballistic missile strike on Diego Garcia.
Which is incredibly significant. Diego Garcia is a highly secretive, militarized atoll in the central Indian Ocean, jointly operated by the UK and the US.
Right, it's a major staging ground.
Exactly. It's where strategic bombers and long-range logistics are staged to project power into the Middle East. If you were hitting Diego Garcia, you were blinding the Western military apparatus and removing their forward operating deterrence.
And it gets worse. There are accounts in the sources of a U.S. supply ship being attacked in the Red Sea where 30,000 interceptors were lost in just 20 minutes. I'd read that twice. 30,000.
This perfectly illustrates the bankruptcy of asymmetric warfare. Let's explain how naval air defense actually works.
Please do, because 30,000 sounds impossible.
So, a U.S. guided missile destroyer, or a supply group, has a limited magazine of sophisticated interceptor missiles, say, the SM-2. These missiles are technological marvels, capable of plucking a supersonic threat out of the sky.
But they aren't cheap.
No, they cost upwards of $2 million each. And the adversary is swarming the ship with cheap, mass-produced aerial drones that cost maybe $20,000 each.
So you were forced to shoot down a $20,000 drone with a $2 million missile.
Yes. And you only have so many missiles in your vertical launch tubes. Once those tubes are empty, the ship is defenseless. You can't reload those missile cells at sea. You have to go back to a friendly, sophisticated port.
Oh, wow.
So when the sources say 30,000 interceptors were expended or lost, it means the naval shield is cracking under the sheer mathematical weight of cheap swarm warfare.
The sources also point to the destruction of the world's biggest LNG liquefied natural gas plant, causing an instant $20 billion loss.
Just math.
Just to visualize that, an LNG plant takes natural gas, chills it to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit so it turns into a liquid,
Yeah.
shrinking its volume by 600 times so it can be put on a ship.
Right.
When a facility like that is destroyed, you don't just lose the building. You instantly sever the energy lifeline to places like Europe or Japan who rely on those specific shipments to keep their winter grids online.
When you aggregate those specific data points, Diego Garcia, the Red Sea interceptor depletion, the LNG plant destruction, the fragility of the Strait of Hormuz, you see a systematic dismantling of global energy infrastructure and military deterrence.
It's all connected.
It is the exact kind of terrifying, overwhelming instability that Bill Cooper predicted back in 1992 would be necessary to break the psychological resilience of the global population.
And I have to push back a little here.
Yeah.
Let's really look at the sheer scale of orchestration this theory implies.
Okay.
Coordinating the collapse of the entire global economy, keeping thousands of moving parts perfectly aligned across different sovereign nations, just to scare people into accepting a digital ID.
It's a lot.
It's like someone wanting to sell you a highly restrictive, incredibly expensive umbrella, But instead of just waiting for a rainy day, they artificially seed the clouds to create a Category 5 hurricane first.
That's a great way to put it.
You don't just buy the umbrella at that point, you are drowning and you beg for it.
Mm.
But is it actually feasible to control the hurricane once you seed it? Human nature is chaotic. How do these architects guarantee the chaos doesn't just consume them too?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is precisely how historical consolidations of power have always worked. And it's why the elites in this theory insulate themselves.
They have their bunkers.
They don't live in the communities that fled. They retreat to their proverbial arcs. Overwhelming economic collapse and physical fear are the most reliable, historically proven tools for subjugation.
Because hunger overrules ideology.
Exactly. The prophecy sources we reviewed actually use the specific metaphor of the black horse from the Book of Revelation to describe this phase.
The black horse represents famine, right?
Yes, famine, scarcity, and hyperinflated prices. The text in Revelation says, a quart of wheat for a denarius, which historically meant an entire day's wage would barely buy enough flour to bake a single loaf of bread.
Wow. An entire day's wage for one loaf.
When you are standing in a breadline, when your children are hungry, abstract concepts like liberty, freedom of speech, and data privacy completely lose their value.
You just don't care anymore.
The physiological fear overrides the intellectual desire for independence. You will willingly surrender your autonomy to anyone, any system, any global governance structure that promises stability and a meal.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the next phase of the theory. Because once the global population is sufficiently panicked, once national governments begin to buckle under the weight of insurmountable economic strain, and one of our sources notably predicts the outright economic collapse of 13 U.S. states in a 2026 recession.
Which is terrifyingly specific.
It is. Once that happens, the architects, the elites, step in. But they don't step in as military conquerors with tanks and rifles. They step in as saviors. They introduce their Hegelian solution, a centralized, digitized system of survival.
And this brings us entirely out of the theoretical realm of 1992 predictions and into the very tangible, measurable present.
Right.
The sources highlight recent real-world developments that align perfectly with this solution phase. Specifically, they point to the recent announcement by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer proposing a mandatory digital ID system.
Right, but wait, getting billions of people to simultaneously agree to a global ID system seems practically impossible.
It does.
Even in a crisis, human nature is stubborn. There will be holdouts, people who say, I'll just trade silver or I'll barter. How do these architects actually bypass that resistance?
They bypass it by tying the digital ID directly to the only thing keeping you alive, money. The sources clearly connect the push for a digital ID to the broader, incredibly aggressive global rollout of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
Which we're seeing all over the news.
Exactly. If you don't adopt the ID, you cannot access the CBDC. If you cannot access the CBDC, you cannot transact in modern society.
Let's really break down the how of a CBDC, because I think a lot of people hear digital currency and they think, I already use Apple Pay. I already check my Chase app. My money is already digital. What's the difference?
The difference is monumental. It is a fundamental shift in the architecture of money itself. The digital money you use right now in your banking app represents decentralized commercial bank money.
It's an IOU.
It's essentially an IOU from your specific bank. But a CBDC is a direct liability of the central bank itself, like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank. But more importantly, a CBDC is programmable money.
Programmable money. Explain what that physically means for the user.
When we say programmable money, we mean the central bank or the governing algorithm can attach a specific line of code to your digital dollar. It involves smart contracts.
Like conditions on how you spend it.
Exactly. Imagine a digital dollar bill that simply deletes itself if you try to spend it on gasoline after you've hit your monthly carbon limit.
Wow.
Or imagine money that has an expiration date coded into it, a concept called demurrage. The government says, we need to stimulate the economy, so the $1,000 we just deposited into your CBDC wallet will literally vanish. It will evaporate into zero if you don't spend it within 30 days.
That is terrifying. Yeah. It means you can't save. You can't build generational wealth.
You can't. And it gets more granular. They can geofence your funds. Say there is a new pandemic lockdown or a climate emergency.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The code in your money restricts it from being spent more than 5 miles from your registered home address. If you try to buy a train ticket to leave the city, the transaction is simply denied.
Because the money knows where you are?
The money knows where you are, it knows what you are buying, and it knows whether you have the social credit score or the digital ID clearance to make that purchase.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Both the contemporary Christian prophecy sources we reviewed and the 1992 Bill Cooper interview draw a direct, undeniable line between this highly technical modern digital ID and CBDC infrastructure and Revelation 13.
The mark of the beast.
Yes, the mark of the beast.
But the textual parallel they draw is stark and honestly hard to ignore once you see it. Revelation 13, written on the Isle of Patmos 2 millennia ago, describes a global system where, and I quote the concept directly, no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark.
Which is wild to think about from a historical perspective.
For centuries, theologians and historians debated how such a totalizing system could ever be practically enforced globally. How do you stop two farmers from trading a chicken for a bag of apples?
Right. Historically, the logistics of absolute financial surveillance were impossible. The Roman Empire couldn't do it. The Soviet Union couldn't do it.
Okay.
There was always a black market, always physical cash, always gold or barter.
Exactly. But now, with a fully integrated digital ID tied to a programmable CBDC operating on a centralized blockchain ledger where physical cash has been entirely phased out, the technological infrastructure for that exact biblical system currently exists.
It's here.
If you try to trade that chicken for apples using the CBDC system, the algorithm flags the unapproved peer-to-peer transaction and locks both wallets.
The terrifying simplicity of this control mechanism is what stands out to me. Cooper noted back in '92 that a modern, digitized takeover doesn't look like historical tyranny.
It doesn't look like 1984.
Exactly. When we picture tyranny, we picture jackboots. But you don't need a single drop of blood to be spilled. You don't need to put physical chains on people's arms and legs. You don't need gulags or secret police kicking down doors in the middle of the night.
Not at all.
The control is entirely invisible, financial, and absolute. If your digital ID is turned off, you don't exist in the economy. You can't buy groceries, you can't pay rent, you can't receive a salary, you can't pay for the electricity to keep your home warm.
It's essentially the weaponization of participation. In the ancient world, exile used to mean being physically banished from a city, cast out into the wilderness.
Right.
In this proposed digital system, exile happens instantly, digitally, while you are sitting comfortably on your own sofa. You are banished from the human network with the flick of a switch.
But I have to ask, looking at how eagerly people embrace new technology, are people adopting these technologies out of convenience? Or is there a genuine creeping coercion happening right in front of us?
That's the big question.
Because I look around and we all use tap to pay. We use facial recognition to unlock our phones dozens of times a day. We scan our retinas to get through airport security faster. We actively love the frictionlessness of it. Are we just building our own cage because we're too lazy to remember passwords?
And that, according to the sources, is the brilliance of the trap. The architecture of control is always initially built on convenience.
It has to be, or people would reject it.
You adopt it voluntarily because it makes your life measurably easier. You don't have to carry a wallet. You just scan your palm at Whole Foods. But once critical mass is achieved, once physical cash is quietly phased out, and the alternative analog pathways are removed.
Which they usually do under some other guise, right?
Exactly, usually under the guise of stopping terrorism, preventing tax evasion, or ensuring economic stability during that engineered global crisis we talked about. Once that happens, the convenience hardens into a mandate.
The velvet glove comes off.
The velvet glove comes off, and the iron fist of programmable control remains. You didn't realize you were stepping into a cell because the door was open and the Wi-Fi was incredibly fast, but once you are entirely dependent on it, the door locks.
Okay, so this leads us to what might be the most mind-bending philosophical part of the entire deep dive. We have these eerie, almost structural similarities between a 2,000-year-old biblical text and modern digital banking rollouts. Programmable money fits the definition of buying and selling, only with the mark perfectly. So the question is, why? Why are these purported global elites seemingly going out of their way to fulfill biblical prophecy? Are they secretly religious zealots?
This is where Bill Cooper's hypothesis takes a massive fascinating detour from standard geopolitical analysis.
I love this part.
Cooper didn't necessarily approach this from the perspective of a religious believer watching God's divine plan organically unfold. He approached it as a naval intelligence analyst observing a massive psychological operation, a PSYOPS.
Okay, explain that.
He claimed that the elites are intentionally, deliberately using the Book of Revelation as a literal script for their global takeover.
A script. They are looking at the apocalypse and treating it like a corporate timeline.
Exactly.
Phase 1, war. Phase 2, famine. Phase 3, global digital ID. But why? Why use a religious text?
The sources explain why they would do something so seemingly bizarre. It's about psychological neutralization. It's about hacking the human mind by hijacking pre-existing neural pathways of submission.
Wait, expand on that. Hijacking neural pathways.
Think about the demographics of the world. There are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people across the globe whose foundational worldview, their deepest understanding of reality, is shaped by the Bible.
Right.
They have been taught since Sunday school that the end of the world will happen exactly as written in Revelation. Now, if these global architects simply roll out a tyrannical global digital ID, a unified global currency, and a centralized government, what happens?
The public rebels?
Exactly. The public, especially the heavily armed, individualistic, religiously conservative public, will violently resist. They will see it as a political tyranny that must be overthrown.
Yeah.
But if you make the rollout look exactly like the prophecies in Revelation,
Oh, wow.
if you literally script the events, the wars in the Middle East, the economic collapse, the global ID to mirror the text perfectly, how do those believers react?
They don't see it as a political tyranny they can fight. They say, this was written millennia ago. This is God's ordained, unstoppable prophecy coming to pass.
Exactly. They say, who am I to resist God's will? It has to happen this way. It is written.
That is incredibly manipulative.
By mimicking the prophecy, the architects of this control system instantly neutralize the very demographic that would typically be most resistant to a globalized government. They won't fight it. They will passively prepare for the end. They will pray. They will retreat.
It's an incredible thought experiment. It makes me think of a hostile corporate takeover.
How so?
Well, in a normal hostile takeover, the invading CEO might try to fire everyone, and the employees strike. They fight back. But what if the invading CEO uses the company's own sacred bylaws, the founding documents written by the beloved founder, to systematically dismantle the organization from the inside out?
Yes, but it's even more insidious than that analogy. In a corporate takeover, the employees eventually realize they've been fired and their pensions are gone. In this scenario, the script of Revelation is used so the population feels spiritually validated by their own subjugation. As they are losing everything, their privacy, their autonomy, their wealth, they are comforting themselves by saying, this means salvation is near.
What's fascinating here is how weaponizing a population's deepest religious convictions might actually be the most effective form of mind control ever conceived.
It truly is.
If you can convince someone that their subjugation is a divine inevitability, you don't even need to police them. They will police themselves. They will accept the mark or the digital ID not just as a civic necessity, but as an unavoidable spiritual milestone.
Or, as Cooper also posited, you have to acknowledge the alternative hypothesis.
Which is?
That God is indeed real, and the prophecies are genuinely unfolding exactly as written by divine design, and these elites are merely the unwitting actors playing their assigned roles in a cosmic drama.
Right, the alternative.
But either way, whether it is a cynical PSYOPS or divine inevitability, the result on the ground is the same. A population that surrenders rather than rebels.
And one of the most chilling details Cooper points out in his book, which he titled, Behold a Pale Horse, drawn directly from Revelation chapter 6, is the linguistic root of that prophecy.
Yes, the linguistics are fascinating.
The sources dive deep into this etymology, and it gave me shivers. The Greek word used in the original text for pale is chloros.
Yes, chloros. It's where we get the word chlorine or chlorophyll. It translates to a sickly, yellowish-greenish color.
Like sickness?
In the ancient world, it was the literal color of death, of a decaying corpse, of pestilence.
So you look at the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
The red horse is war. The engineered conflict in the Middle East. The black horse is famine and economic collapse. The $150 oil and the broken supply chains tying right back to our Strait of Hormuz discussion.
Right.
And the pale horse, chloros, is the resulting mass death from pestilence and starvation.
By naming his book that, Cooper was signaling that we are entering the final act of this scripted play, the transition from economic collapse to mass casualty.
So if this grand apocalyptic takeover is happening right in plain sight, if the economy is being rigged to collapse, if our digital infrastructure is being weaponized into an inescapable programmable cage, and if it's all following an ancient script, why isn't the global public in an absolute uproar?
It's a great question.
Why are the streets quiet? Why are we just going to work and grabbing lattes? And the sources offer a very clear, very cynical answer to that. Weaponized distraction.
The historical concept of the Roman circus.
Exactly. Peneminent circenses. Bread and circuses. I want to spend some time on this because it's not just a cliche. The sources cite Cooper's sheer outrage over professional athletes.
Oh, yeah, he was furious about that.
He brings up athletes being paid $6 million a year, which was astronomical in '92, let alone today's $250 million contracts. He argues that the emperor, or the global elites, uses sports, media, and the endless churn of entertainment to keep the worker bees entirely preoccupied.
Preoccupied and divided.
Yes. We bond over who plays third base for the Mets. We memorize player stats. We argue over referee calls in bars. But we remain utterly, willfully ignorant of the global manipulation happening right above our heads.
And we need to look at how the Roman circus actually worked historically to understand the modern equivalent. The Roman poet Juvenal coined the phrase. In the late Roman Republic and the Empire, when the economy was failing, when the political system was entirely corrupt and the Republic was crumbling into an autocracy, the emperors didn't rely solely on the military to keep the plebeians in line. They calculated the exact mathematical formula needed to prevent riots.
The cure annone.
Right. The grain dole. They provided a baseline of free wheat, the bread, and they hosted massive, spectacular chariot races at the Circus Maximus and gladiator games at the Colosseum. The circuses.
Keep them fed, keep them entertained.
As long as the citizens had full bellies and a spectacle to direct their emotional energy toward, they didn't care that they had lost their democratic rights. They cheered for the blue faction or the green faction in the chariot races while the Senate was stripped of its power.
And today, the bread is cheap, ultra-processed food, and the circus is the algorithm.
Oh, absolutely.
It's TikTok, it's the NFL, it's Netflix. The dopamine loops are engineered so perfectly that we don't even look up. But this isn't just a vague complaint about society watching too much TV. The sources guide us through a very specific, undeniable, follow-the-money exercise regarding media consolidation that feels like a detective revealing the murder weapon.
It's a brilliant exercise.
It's an exercise you could do right now on your smartphone.
Cooper stated decades ago that essentially all media is owned by a tiny fraction of corporations, overseen by groups like the Council on Foreign Relations. This ensures that the circus never accidentally broadcasts the truth or strays outside the parameters of acceptable debate.
Let's walk through the specific 2026 example provided in the text, because it is incredibly eye-opening. You feel like you have a million choices of what to watch. You have cable, streaming, podcasts, news sites.
Sure, it feels like infinite variety.
But trace the money. You start with CNN. You think, okay, CNN is an independent news organization. Who owns CNN? It's owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. But wait, Warner Brothers Discovery is currently being acquired in a massive $110 billion deal by Paramount.
Right.
Who owns Paramount? They were recently bought by Skydance Media. Who leads Skydance? A man named David Ellison. Who is David Ellison?
Yeah.
The son of Oracle billionaire Larry Ellison.
The path always leads up to a billionaire deeply connected to the global power structure. Oracle is deeply embedded in national security, cloud computing, and massive data management.
Exactly. And just to put a bow on it, the text notes that CBS News, which is also under that Paramount umbrella,
Right.
just had its editor-in-chief, Barry Weiss, appointed immediately after this massive acquisition. The detective trail always ends in a boardroom with 5 people.
The illusion of choice is the ultimate silencer. You flip through hundreds of channels, you read dozens of news sites, you scroll endless social feeds, and you feel like you are getting a diversity of thought.
You feel engaged.
You feel informed, you feel like you are engaging in a democratic exchange of ideas. But when you map the corporate DNA, it all funnels back to a handful of holding companies and billionaires.
They control the narrative.
They don't just control what you think, they control what there is to think about. They set the boundaries of the playing field, they tell you what is news, and more importantly, by omission, what isn't. If the consolidation of global media isn't deemed newsworthy by the global media, the public never discusses it.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the human condition described in these sources, life just grinds us down. The mortgage, the rent, the commute, the inflation, The sheer stress of modern existence.
It's exhausting.
We don't use the endless scroll of TikTok and Netflix because we're stupid. We use it as a survival mechanism. It's an anesthetic. We are tired. But while we are numbing ourselves on the couch, there are 150 of the most powerful people in the world meeting in secret in places like Baden, Germany, or the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. They are quite literally plotting the economic, social, and technological fate of billions of people. And society just doesn't care.
We are culturally exhausted, and an exhausted, distracted population will never look behind the curtain. They are too busy just trying to survive the week, to worry about the architecture of the decade.
Wow.
The elites know that if you keep the middle class on a treadmill of economic anxiety and digital dopamine, you can build the digital ID infrastructure right beneath their feet.
But, and this is where we have to go deep, the control established by the digital ID, the chaos of the Middle East, the masking by the media circus. None of this is the final destination.
Not even close.
The sources point to an ultimate endgame that goes so far beyond economics, beyond CBDCs, or even political control. It leaps entirely out of the realm of sociology and into the realm of biology.
This is where we cross the Rubicon into transhumanism. In 1992, Cooper revealed a claim that must have sounded like pure, unadulterated science fiction to his audience at the time.
I'm sure people thought he was crazy.
Oh, absolutely. He said that these elites recognize the continuity of life, but aren't satisfied with their mortal limits. They are ultimately seeking physical immortality. Their core belief system, the religion of the elite according to Cooper, is that through pure reason, genetic engineering, and advanced technology, man will essentially become God. They intend to engineer a super race that defies aging and death.
You want to break out of the human condition entirely. And what's terrifying is that you look at the modern proofs provided in the sources, and it's no longer science fiction, it is the morning news.
It's happening right now.
We are blowing past the ethical boundaries that used to hold science in check. The text lists it out meticulously. First, we have Neuralink. They have successfully implanted read-write brain chips into human patients, allowing a man to play chess on a computer, move a cursor, and interact with the digital world using nothing but his thoughts.
And we need to explain the how of Neuralink because it's vital to understanding the endgame. This isn't just a helmet you wear.
Right.
It involves a surgical robot physically weaving microscopic threads, thinner than a human hair, directly into the motor cortex of your brain. These threads detect neural spikes.
Which sounds incredibly invasive.
Very. Right now, it's mostly read technology, reading the brain's intent to move a mouse. But the stated goal is read-write capability, meaning the computer can write data back into your neural pathways. It can alter perception, alter mood, alter memory.
My God. And then the sources point to the apex of academia. Places like Harvard and MIT aren't just studying longevity. They're conducting active clinical trials for age reversal drugs.
Yes.
They're looking at cellular reprogramming, lengthening telomeres, literally trying to hack the biological clock so that the cells forget how to age.
You combine that biological hacking with the rise of artificial intelligence. The sources cite the CEO of OpenAI publicly predicting that we will achieve artificial general intelligence AGI, meaning an AI that is as smart or smarter than a human in every cognitive task within just a few years.
Which changes everything.
What happens when an AGI designs the next iteration AGI? You get an intelligence explosion. And the explicitly stated next logical step by these tech leaders, not a conspiracy theory, but their stated public goal, is the direct merging of human biological intelligence with machine intelligence so we aren't left behind as an obsolete species.
This raises an important question, maybe the most important question in this entire deep dive. If the digital ID on your phone or your smart card is just the first step in tracking and controlling participation in society, is the ultimate endgame in ID that isn't external at all.
Right.
Are we looking at a future where the mechanism of control is literally merged with human biology?
That is the logical, inescapable conclusion of the trajectory mapped out in these sources. Let's look at the philosophy discussed at places like Davos. Thinkers associated with those summits often discuss the concept of the useless class.
The useless class.
Yeah, as AI and automation take over physical labor, intellectual labor, coding, art, and logistics, what do you do with 8 billion humans who are no longer economically necessary?
You give them universal basic income, through a programmable CBDC, you sedate them with the algorithmic Roman circus,
Yeah.
and you monitor them with a digital ID.
Exactly. But if the goal of the elites is absolute unbreakable control over this massive obsolete population, a plastic card or a smartphone app is still too vulnerable.
Because you could just throw it away.
Right. A phone can be lost, it can be hacked, it can be thrown in a river by someone wanting to escape the grid. A biometric, neurologically integrated interface, a chip in the brain, or a nanotech sequence in the bloodstream, that is permanent. That is the ultimate fusion of the biblical mark and the individual. You no longer carry your digital identity, you are your digital identity. Your biological state, your location, your thoughts, your purchases are permanently tethered to the network. And whoever controls the network controls you.
It is a staggering amount of information to synthesize. We've gone from the geography of the Persian Gulf to the motor cortex of the human brain.
It's a massive scope.
Let's try to pull this all together for the listener. From the sources we've explored today, we are looking at a grand, unified theory of engineered subjugation. It begins with deliberate geopolitical chaos, specifically focusing on the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz to trigger an apocalyptic, cascading global economic collapse through hyperinflated energy costs.
Right, the engineered problem.
That collapse, that mathematically induced famine, is designed to terrify the public into begging for a solution. A completely centralized, programmable digital ID and a global CBDC financial system.
A system that eerily, perfectly mirrors the ancient biblical script of Revelation, potentially utilized as a masterful psychological weapon to spiritually neutralize resistance from billions of believers.
And all of this is hidden in plain sight, masked by a consolidated, billionaire-owned media apparatus that feeds the public an endless diet of sports, celebrity gossip, and digital distraction, the modern, algorithmic Roman circus.
Right, leading to an ultimate transhumanist future where the elites achieve technological immortality and godhood, while the rest of humanity, the worker bees, are perfectly biologically integrated into a permanent digital control grid that can never physically escape.
It's a dark picture. But our sources don't just leave us in despair. Bill Cooper's final warning in that 1992 tape is an incredibly powerful call to action.
It really is.
He practically begs the listener to take intellectual and civic responsibility. He says explicitly, don't believe George Bush and don't believe me. He demands that you do your own research, you have to verify the documents, follow the corporate money trails yourself, understand the technology, and use your critical thinking.
He emphasizes using the Constitution, utilizing the power of the vote, and speaking out while we still have those analog mechanisms available to us.
And he uses this incredibly visceral metaphor at the end of the tape that really stuck with me. He says, if you don't help cook the meal in the kitchen, you have absolutely no right to complain about what is put on your plate in the living room.
That's brilliant.
If you just sit on the couch watching the circus while someone else plans the menu, buys the ingredients, and cooks the food, you have to eat what you are served, even if it's poison.
It's the ultimate warning against apathy. By abdicating your civic, intellectual, and spiritual responsibility, you are consenting to whatever reality the people in power decide to build for you.
It makes you wonder about the very real choices we are going to face in the near future, not decades from now, but in the next few years. Which leaves me with a final thought, something not explicitly detailed in the text, but that feels like the inevitable collision course of everything we've talked about today regarding the digital ID endgame. Well, if a neurological or biometric digital ID eventually becomes the absolute mandatory toll bridge for participating in the global economy, will we see the birth of a massive, completely analog shadow society?
Oh, that's interesting.
Could the elite push for total biological digital integration paradoxically create a parallel civilization of humans who simply choose to walk away into the woods? People who return to physical barter, heirloom seeds, and analog communities, essentially splitting humanity into two entirely different species, the digitally integrated immortals and the mortal analog-free.
It's profound thought.
We want a clear, precise picture of the future, but the reality of global geopolitics and technological evolution is messy, complex, and crucially, it is still unwritten. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the narratives, do your own research, and we'll see you next time.